Night after night, as the world outside hums with muted city lights and slow rhythms, you close your eyes and drift toward that uncertain, liminal place where thoughts loosen and reality begins to dissolve. The day's residue clings tightly, a tangled mass of fleeting stress, flashes of hope, maybe the heavy pulse of exhaustion. And somehow, even as sleep claims your body, a part of you wonders, what if all this feeling, this churn beneath your skin, is not a burden but a kind of hidden wealth? What if the very exhaustion you nurse with each quiet exhale is a precious resource, not a liability? You lie in a familiar dark, but there is something unfamiliar pulling at the edges of your consciousness. It's almost a whisper, a strange notion lingering beneath the surface noise of everyday life, stirring up memories of times when you woke up unexpectedly charged, like the world had shifted just a little in your favor. Was it just a fleeting coincidence? Or does each night cradle undiscovered alchemy? Tonight, the story that unfolds is nothing like the tales you heard as a child. It is neither pure lullaby nor innocent fable. Instead, it beckons you into a territory where reality and possibility meet, a place where feelings, no matter how messy or unwelcome, can be refined into brilliance. Picture a different kind of laboratory, not one of cold steel and fluorescent light, but a golden chamber that exists only when your body lets go and your mind surrenders to the alchemy of sleep. Here, emotions are not simply felt. They are melted, shaped, and transformed by processes you do not consciously direct but might have sensed in half-remembered dreams. It is curious, isn't it, how society so often urges us to banish discomfort, to stay positive, to tuck away the inconvenient heaviness of fatigue or gloom. Yet, every night you faithfully bring all that baggage with you under the covers, still hoping, perversely perhaps, for rest or even renewal. What if you could step into your own story where the act of feeling itself, the full, wild spectrum, is not a tax you pay for living but a reservoir? Can you imagine that, instead of being spent, your emotions become the molten gold from which prosperity is poured? All around you, the world is filled with people tirelessly pursuing wealth and power through relentless daytime effort. But rarely does anyone ask what might be possible if prosperity did not arrive solely by effort or luck, but through the gentle, inevitable process of turning what you feel into something greater. This is not the promise of easy magic, nor simple self-help advice. It is a quieter, subtler revolution, the kind that seeps in during the dead of night when willpower sleeps and your soul begins to stir. Perhaps you recall moments in your life when a problem that seemed insolvable yielded unexpectedly after a good night's sleep. Or perhaps you woken with clarity about a desire, a relationship, or a path forward, as if some invisible force had quietly rearranged the puzzle pieces while you slumbered. Is that merely biology, some trick of the subconscious, or does it hint at a deeper, almost mystical mechanic at play? Imagine, just for the span of your next heartbeat, that you could access a hidden workshop within yourself, where all your emotional tumult, the regret and longing, the subtle aches, the quiet joys, are slowly transmuted, recast into the very architecture of a richer future. As this journey opens before you tonight, it is not about denying the weight you carry. It is about awakening to how precious that weight can become if treated as raw material. You are invited to walk through a story where nothing you encounter within yourself needs to be discarded or wasted. There is a space, and soon you will explore it, where emotional energy does not dissipate uselessly into the night. Instead, it gathers, swirls, and, under certain unseen laws, begins to shine anew. By the end of tonight's tale, you may discover that your own exhaustion, far from being a dead end, might just be the beginning of an untapped legacy. So let the edges of your day blur. Settle in, not simply to listen, but to witness, perhaps the first time, the mysterious bond between feeling deeply and growing richer for it, in ways you could never have anticipated. This is no ordinary bedtime story. This is a gentle descent into the place where your emotional truth quietly holds the power to reshape your destiny, all while the world dreams on. Imagine, then, a peculiar evening deep in a city pulsating with ambition, a metropolis whose windows flicker restlessly even as midnight claws at the horizon. Elena, a seasoned architect with hands as deft as violin strings and eyes perpetually shadowed by fatigue, found herself walking home far later than intended. Her shoes echoed on wet pavement, each step accompanied by muddled thoughts that seemed determined to wrestle sleep for their own purposes. Head down, she meandered through alleyways gilded with puddles reflecting garish neon, each color a reminder of the day's unfinished sketches, negotiations, and the rising pressure that always stuck with her long after the office lights dimmed. Unbeknownst to Elena, her path was about to veer into the extraordinary. As she turned a familiar corner, the world's edges began to bend, sounds muffled as if underwater. A curious scent, somewhere between burnt sugar and new paper, teased her senses, and the tired weight behind her eyelids shifted into peculiar alertness. Blinking, she found herself not on the expected avenue, but at the threshold of a grand door made of copper filigree and veined stone. It seemed to vibrate gently, an invitation too compelling to resist. Stepping across its boundary, Elena entered a chamber of gilded mechanisms and sweeping arches, the air shimmering with a faint golden haze. Instruments of uncertain purpose lined the walls, aura spinning quietly, prisms refracting invisible beams, even an ancient phonograph that played melodies just on the verge of memory. Figures moved within, artisans in aprons smudged with sapphire soot, tirelessly guiding streams of light into swirling glass vials. Above them all, a vast dome revealed constellations she'd never known, unfamiliar stars suggestive of hidden maps. Elena paused, heart pounding, half in awe, half suspecting this was some fever dream born of exhaustion. A man approached, old yet brisk, with sparks of wit in his eyes and a cravat loosely knotted at his throat. He offered no name, only a single question. Have you ever wondered what becomes of the restlessness you drag into the night? Ignoring her confusion, he motioned her toward a work table where different colored liquids bubbled beneath enigmatic glyphs. Here, he said, gesturing to a violet mist encased above a flame, we capture what the city tries so hard to suppress. That pressing discomfort, the creative longing, even the desperation and a missed opportunity, each hold a latent vigor far too precious to waste. Elena, still disoriented, watched closely as the man drew forth a glass tube and poured a silvery droplet onto its swirling surface. The liquid writhed, shifting into a delicate lattice that radiated warmth. Conventional wisdom tells us to discard what weighs us down, the old man continued. Yet here we do the opposite. We do not deny the ache, we distill it. As he spoke, other artisans nearby transformed shadows into glinting coins, laughter into liquid gold, and even tears, carefully collected, into tiny crystals that seemed to defy gravity. Gradually, Elena's skepticism faded, replaced by an unmistakable sense of participation. The fatigue in her bones now felt less like a shackle and more like a raw mineral in the palm of her hand, waiting to be refined. She hesitated, then pressed her fingertips to an iridescent panel as instructed, watching her own pulse projected in rippling blues and gentle flashes. What would you do, the man mused, if you understood that the heaviest parts of your day could fuel the richest days of your life? His voice, though soft, carried through the luminous space, nudging her to consider the choices she'd made, to recall occasions when her exhaustion drove her toward unexpected clarity rather than mere collapse. Suddenly, a bell-like resonance filled the hall, and the other artisans paused to regard Elena. She felt exposed, yet somehow lighter. One of them, a woman with copper wiring braided into her hair, presented an orb brimming with opalescent fog. Every night you visit here, you offer something: grief, yearning, or simply weariness. Each is woven in, not washed out, she whispered. Elena took the orb, its coolness steadying her nerves as strands of fog began to play through her thoughts, gathering prickling regrets and leftover joy alike. Moments stretched and blurred, a gentle kaleidoscope of intangible energy flowing from Elena and into the laboratory's intricate machinery. She realized, with a shivering certainty, that here, nothing was forbidden entry. The entire orchestra of her experience, every spike and valley, coalesced into potential awaiting direction. Even as the chamber faded, dissolving into the dark warmth of her waiting bed, Elena understood something rare. While the world above only seemed to prize what's already polished and complete, this realm beneath the threshold coveted the raw, the restless, and the real. Now, as you find yourself in Elena's place, straddling weariness and wonder, pause to imagine what incredible ingenuity could flourish from your own overlooked moments. Is there, Perhaps a hidden artisan within you, aching to collect those emotional fragments and convert them into a personal abundance? The thought lingers, subtle and persistent, as you drift deeper into the story's labyrinthine heart. Beneath a gilded arch that curved like the rib of some mythic creature, Elena's gaze snagged on a series of alcoves embedded into the luminous walls. Each nook pulsed with a different cadence, some bright and insistent, others deep and resolute, all hinting at a quiet intelligence humming beneath the laboratory's golden exterior. Venturing forward, her footsteps muffled against the velvet-like floor, she found herself drawn to a cluster of illuminated panes where artisans, stooped in quiet concentration, handled not vials of emotion or gems of longing, but curious gears and translucent blueprints. In these hands, raw emotion was sculpted not only into physical representations, but also into structures meant to serve others. A young apprentice with eyes sharp as flint beckoned Elena closer, motioning her to watch as he inserted what looked like a ribbon of shifting color, a tangible filament of anxiety, into the clockwork of a serpentine device. You see, every feeling has its own rhythm, its potential to power movement, he murmured, as the contraption responded, unfurling delicate fan blades and casting dancing shadows across the marble. If calibrated just right, even agitation becomes propulsion. Listen. At his touch, the machine released a pulse of sound, not unlike the gentle sweep of a brush on canvas, and the surrounding tools stirred as though roused from a deep sleep. Moving further along the chamber, Elena's senses were caught by the faint aroma of sage and parchment, drifting from an alcove where a hooded woman penned intricate formulas across parchment. She paused only briefly when Elena approached, her quill poised midair. "What's most volatile fuels the brightest fire for invention," she said, her smile hinting at mischief. "Last week we ran out of patience. Quite literally. An entire archive had to be recatalogued from scratch. Even frustration, stored well, becomes a guide." She returned to work, her script blossoming into spirals and sigils, each line a conduit for fresh creation. Beyond these workshops, Elena glimpsed a towering aviary, its latticework laced with threads of lilac and gold. Within, creatures of whimsical proportions, half bird, half fleeting emotion, fluttered in suspended harmony, their wings stitched from nerve and memory. She leaned closer and felt a feather-light sensation brush her cheek, a fleeting touch of envy, transformed into buoyancy, lifting her mood as surely as a note in a forgotten song. It struck her that far from being locked away, these volatile forces were allowed to roam, to test their own limits within the safe walls of the sanctuary. Pausing by a pool of mirror-like fluid, Elena knelt to watch as images flickered across its surface. Scenes of triumph tangled with moments of insecurity. In a single reflection, she saw herself comforting a friend after a harsh setback. In another, she hesitated before a crucial decision, second-guessing her instincts. Every ripple spun a story. Not a fear, but possibility. Each emotion repositioned as stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks. Fascinated, she let her fingers trail through the cool liquid, half expecting the images to vanish, only to find them multiplying, branching into new pathways, new opportunities. At that moment, an older artisan approached, his hands mottled with ink and history. He bent beside Elena, his voice low and steady. "You're beginning to see, aren't you?" he said. "What we transmute in this place isn't bound by a simple gain or material reward. The energy you leave behind each night becomes part of greater mechanisms, some you'll never witness, but all shaping the world you return to at dawn." He dropped a tiny mechanism into Elena's palm, its center pulsing gently. This, too, started as a restless hope. Now it moves doors, lights lanterns, warms the hands of those in need. What you carry in is never wasted. Leaving the pool behind, Elena's path wound through arches alive with soft wind. Each breath of the laboratory an invitation to contemplate the interplay of individual and collective prosperity. In this dazzling midnight realm, prosperity revealed itself not as private treasure or solitary attainment, but as a network of shared transformation, where every soul's nightly surrender made tomorrow's promise a little brighter for all. Moving deeper into the heart of the luminous laboratory, Elena's path began to weave through a corridor humming softly with tension, as if unseen currents brace themselves for revelation. Here, instead of artisans or machines, she found an uncanny collection of doorways, each marked not by a number, but by a subtle resonance. One vibrated with suppressed laughter, another throbbed with silent disappointment. A third shimmered with anticipation like unshed tears trembling at the edge of joy. Drawn almost magnetically to a portal swirling with muted greens and silvers, she hesitated before entering, the sensation in her chest bright and unfamiliar. Curiosity no longer burdened by expectation. On the other side, the scene shifted dramatically. The ornate gold of the prior chambers gave way to a sprawling conservatory, alive with a riot of scents and ever-changing colors. The air was heady with blooming jasmine and the bittersweet tang of citrus. Vines, thick with iridescent leaves, coiled towards invisible sources of light. At the heart of this growing sanctuary stood a woman, whose presence radiated both calm and controlled energy. Her garden was unlike any Elena had seen. Instead of orderly rows, here chaos ruled, a symphony of tangled roots and wayward blooms, each plant carrying an aura of some potent half-buried feeling. As Elena approached, the gardener looked up, her hands cradling a flower that seemed to pulse with inner light. "Every emotion you've left drifting here has a seed," she explained, gently cracking open a pod that emitted a puff of emerald dust. "Dormant in waking hours, yes, but at night, especially in the hush before dream sees you. Each one is planted anew. This is where prosperity takes root, though never as a direct line. Here it's a wild, unpredictable growth, fed by whatever you resist or embrace." The gardener's words, tender and wise, made Elena examine the chaos before her. She saw that heartbreak led not to decay, but to the richest, darkest soil beneath jubilant new shoots. Uncertainty twisted upwards, flowering beside steadfast calm. Instead of imposing symmetry, the gardener cultivated resilience in the garden's unpredictability. In one shaded alcove, Elena noticed a tree whose trunk was split. On one side, it bore fruit luminous and fragile, while on the other, rough bark guarded a hidden flame. The gardener plucked the fruit, cracked it open, and the scent was pure longing. "Unfulfilled desires feed the sweetest blooms later," she mused, tossing the seeds into a patchwork of moss glimmering with dew. "We don't rush outcomes. The richest prosperity grows from layers. Each regret, each flutter of hope, each quiet grief stacked atop one another. Now, think about your own internal garden. What have you been planting, knowingly or in secret, throughout your restless nights? Are there forgotten seeds germinating in the overlooked corners of your mind, preparing to surprise you with sudden, unexpected fruit? This garden, both tamed and wild, isn't merely about individual gain. Rather, it is a living monument to endurance, transformation, and the audacity of hope that refuses to wither, no matter how dark the winter. Through the garden, Elena witnessed the undeniable link between chaos and bounty. The plants thrived not despite their tangled origins, but because of them. Each had adapted. Stolen light, where none seemed possible, drunk from the well of collective memory and pain, as if to prove that wealth generated in the sleeping mind is, by nature, wild and astonishingly fertile. Accordingly, you too might find, in those tangled patches of private sorrow or abandoned aspiration, the very roots of something new and quietly remarkable growing beneath the surface. Elena's heart surged, not with the straightforward logic of the mechanized room she had traversed before, but with a pulsing, primeval certainty that the night's turmoil was not the price of her ambition, but its foundation. The heady perfume of blossoming secrets filled her senses, and as she stepped from the garden back toward the shifting boundaries of the laboratory, she vowed to nurture the unpredictable, to trust in wild growth, believing that true wealth was less a matter of calculation than an act of faith in what lies just beneath the surface, waiting for a single moment to bloom. As Elena left the lush tumult of the garden behind, the passage grew colder and less golden, lined now with matte silver and faint, crystalline tints. Her footsteps echoed, accompanied only by the almost imperceptible buzz of thin wires overhead, a sound like distant cicadas singing in anticipation. Veering around a corner, she found herself in a circular chamber crowded with orbs suspended in unlikely arrangements. Some hovered impossibly close together, pulsing with silent tension, while others spun apart, their paths never quite touching. Instinctively, Elena sensed this place dealt with the way energy moved between individuals, not the internal journey of emotion, but what happened when two or more people states collided or intertwined. A hush fell as she entered. Across the room, a pair of figures stood at an elaborate table strewn with metallic strands and pale, glass-like filaments. They were focused on something between them, an invisible pull, like gravity made visible only through its effect on what surrounded it. The taller of the two, her voice steady and resonant, looked up and beckoned Elena closer. Every relationship, no matter how brief, generates its own currency, she said, gesturing at the twining filaments as they shimmered, vibrant wherever her companion's hands brushed them. Some connections electrify the air, others siphon warmth or momentum. Here, rather than seeking perfect harmony, we study the friction. Each flash, each spark, is a transaction with consequences for what each participant brings away. As if to illustrate, the second figure, a soft-spoken man whose fingers moved deftly, touched a strand and its tip glowed blue, sending ripples across neighboring filaments. Elena watched, transfixed, as pockets of resistance and traction lit up the network, mapping the invisible negotiations of fear, empathy, rivalry, and trust that flicker between people each day. The taller woman smiled at Elena's intrigue, explaining, "Much of the wealth produced here is born from what fails to align. Misunderstandings, unspoken desires, mismatched hope. These phenomena generate their own kind of potential, ripe for transformation if you're mindful enough to perceive it." While observing their delicate experiments, Elena's mind conjured her own memories. Those awkward silences at dinner tables, tense negotiations in glass-walled boardrooms, wordless solidarities in crowded elevators. Until now, she had seen those moments as static or unremarkable, but looking at the glowing map before her, she recognized them as crucibles, sites where dormant energy had always simmered, material ready to be redirected into the currents of fortune. For the first time, it occurred to her that conflict itself might be less a breach than a chance to smelt new reservoirs of connection and understanding. Expanding on this, the man told her of a previous experiment. Two rivals, pitched against each other by years of mistrust, were asked to place a token of their frustration on opposite ends of the largest strand. Over several nights, as dreams did their unspoken work, the tension between them began to shimmer not with heat, but with a growing, unexpected lucidity. Old wounds became a code for necessary change, and the very friction that once threatened to snap the filament now balanced it like a taut violin string, ready to produce clear, resonant sound if only the right player approached. Elena felt the resonance settle within her. The truth that energy between people, be it love, rivalry, admiration, or disappointment, could be harvested, redirected, recycled. No single encounter was ever truly finished. Its traces lived on, sometimes dormant, sometimes swirling just beneath the surface of each sleepless night, waiting for a mind open and rested enough to shape it into prosperity. Now, ask yourself, when did you last dismiss a tension or spark with someone as a waste? What if instead it's a raw element, a chance for growth and unexpected gain? Should you choose to work with it thoughtfully when night falls? As the experiment drew to a close, the filaments cooled, retreating back to their natural, faintly glowing state. The echoes from the chamber remained, reverberating quietly in Elena's thoughts as she drifted onward. Each pulse, each exchange, each momentary collision or alliance, no matter how subtle, was a silent transaction written into the ledger of nightly potential, awaiting only your willingness to refine it by the light of your own curious, patient spirit. Through another winding corridor, Elena soon encountered a staircase spiraling downward, its steps smooth from centuries of silent passage. With a sense of anticipation mingled with growing wonder, she descended, the air below carrying a cooler, denser charge. Instead of golden light, a faint, silvery luminescence washed the walls, deepening every shadow and lending the space a quality almost akin to the inside of a pearl. At the bottom, she emerged into a chamber unlike any she had seen before. Here, the laboratory transformed once again, this time into an observatory filled not with tools or instruments, but with vast panels of glass and translucent quartz that traced constellations across the ceiling and onto the floor. Silent, absorbed figures sat scattered throughout, eyes closed or gazing skyward, their breaths synchronized in an unspoken meditation. Quietly, she joined them, Finding a cushion near the center as a gentle woman with hair streaked with silver turned to her and smiled. No words were exchanged. Yet Elena understood she was invited to participate in something that transcended ordinary experience. The group's presence evoked a sensation of standing at the edge of a great sea, every swell and dip mapped in the shifting patterns above. This gathering, as Elena soon realized, revolved around the practice of emotional navigation, the art of surveying one's internal skies for patterns, omens, and potential routes to prosperity that could not be plotted by logic or calculation alone. As silence settled, Elena allowed herself to drift, her usual need for answers softening under the gentle influence of the room. The silver-haired woman began humming, low and steady. The melody wound through the chamber, weaving participants together as though they were threads in a single tapestry. One by one, the figures opened their palms, catching faint motes of light that gathered at their fingertips. Instead of focusing on forging or shaping energy, as the artisans did above, these navigators charted and attuned themselves to subtle shifts within and around them. It became clear this was neither passive dreaming nor conscious planning. Rather, it resembled the delicate art of finding one's way by the stars, trusting intuition and resonance, even when the path ahead was obscured by clouds of uncertainty. Despite her skepticism, Elena felt the invitation in the air. By tilting her head and closing her eyes, she realized she could sense miniature constellations within her own emotional landscape, some glowing bright with hope or curiosity, others dim with caution or self-doubt. She saw that, much as sailors once steered by distant points of light, these explorers used their inner constellations to guide decisions while awake, but also to recalibrate their futures while asleep. Mapping her inner world brought clarity, without the pressure to act immediately. The mere acknowledgement of shifting emotions, desires, and anxieties became a powerful tool, one that did not tame or direct, but clarified which possibilities shimmered most brightly. Encouraged by the group's serenity, Elena found herself drawn into a deeper, trance-like exploration. Intricately, she gathered images of meetings left unresolved, ambitions tethered by apprehension, memories that pulsed with unfinished music. As each fragment found its place in her internal sky, new pathways appeared, delicate as spider silk and promising as the horizon at dawn. She was struck by how, in this unfamiliar quiet, emotional signals unchained from urgency could be as instructive as the most carefully reasoned plans. The room's energy pulsed, gentle but insistent, suggesting that prosperity could emerge as much from attentive listening as from determined creation. Now, consider how this process might manifest in your own routine. Imagine ending your day not by chasing answers or reviewing failures, but by simply charting the constellation of your current state. Which emotions stand out as guiding stars? Which ones flicker at the edges, hinting at unexplored opportunities? This habit of subtle self-navigation, Elena realized, was itself a form of quiet wealth. It required no grand gestures, only a willingness to observe and, perhaps, to trust the murmurings beneath the surface. The true art lay in discerning which patterns persisted night after night, those silent, shining routes pointing steadily toward previously invisible thresholds of possibility. Gradually, the group's humming faded into silence once more. Opening her eyes, Elena found herself fortified, as if every fragment of observation had left a luminous thread within her. There was no single revelation, no magically resolved dilemma, yet something foundational had shifted. The promise of prosperity now glimmered not in any one achievement, but in the very ability to sense the subtle rhythms within herself and all around her, waiting to be charted one night at a time. As the morning drew closer and a subtle violet glow crept into the laboratory's upper alcoves, Elena wandered into a corridor lined with faceted mirrors that stretched from floor to ceiling. The air here was brisk, almost charged, carrying the tang of ozone after a storm. Unlike the quiet, introspective calm of the observatory, this space shimmered with a barely restrained energy. Each mirror seemed to pulse with impressions of lives that Elena felt but couldn't fully name. A child's laughter echoing through winter air, an artist's burst of inspiration beneath flickering street lamps, the crackle of anticipation between old friends reuniting after years apart. This was a place not for stillness, but for the exploration of emotional resonance, how single feelings, when magnified, could ripple into cascades of unexpected fortune. Guided by an instinct she couldn't quite place, Elena paused before one particularly clouded pane. As she watched, the glass cleared, offering not her reflection, but the image of a stranger, an elderly man seated at a simple workbench. Fingers deft as they folded origami cranes from discarded receipts and faded theater tickets. With each crease, color returned to the brittle paper, and soon hundreds of cranes spun gently overhead, filling the air with a low, melodic rustle. The man rarely glanced up from his work, but when he did, Elena noticed the set of his jaw, firm, determined, yet touched with an almost boyish wonder. A voice, sonorous and close, broke into her observations. "What you see," it began, "is a multiplication of a single sentiment, one moment's stubborn hope reborn into a multitude of forms." Elena turned to find a woman in a velvet jacket, her hair clipped back with an ivory comb. Emotional momentum, when amplified, acquires mass like thunderclouds gathering before a downpour. Those who master it create avalanches from snowflakes. Her tone carried no arrogance, only a knowing warmth. She invited Elena to trace her fingers along the mirror, and with every gentle sweep, scenes emerged. A musician channeling grief into soaring symphonies, a chef transforming homesickness into feasts that bound strangers together, a gardener coaxing beauty from fields abandoned after disaster. Rather than focusing on beginnings or individual struggles, this space illuminated the power of what emotions became when joined by action or collective will. Elena observed how one person's passion or even frustration could ignite dormant possibility in others, triggering chain reactions invisible to the ordinary eye. For instance, she saw an exhausted teacher whose simple decision to listen one rainy afternoon inspired a student to dream beyond the town's narrow skyline. Years later, that student returned, breathing new vigor and prosperity into the very streets that once hemmed her in. The laboratory seemed to hum in approval, as if acknowledging that fortune, true, lasting fortune, built itself not only from internal vibrations, but also from their echoes in other lives. Now, turning to your own experience, ask yourself, in what ways have you undervalued the aftershocks of your feelings, assuming only the initial spark had power? Consider the possibility that the smallest emotional investment, your fleeting compassion for a stranger, a private burst of enthusiasm, a stubborn refusal to yield, could propagate outward, gaining momentum like a story retold. The laboratory's warm, radiant mirrors whispered that every surge you felt was not neatly contained. It reverberated, gathered company, and had potential to reshape the world. Building on these revelations, Elena's heart pounded with a sense of possibility. She understood that her attempts to isolate or hide the strongest emotions not only denied her self-growth, but also blocked the pathways by which her presence could nurture prosperity for others. The faces in the mirrors, be they celebrating or struggling, reminded her that no feeling was ever truly solitary. Each left an imprint, a shimmering possibility, just waiting to be reflected back, magnified, and spun into something both enduring and entirely unexpected. Elena moved deeper into the labyrinth, pulled by threads of curiosity she couldn't name. Soon she entered a vaulted hall bathed in the muted glow of blue phosphorescent veins running through the ceiling. The air buzzed faintly, alive with possibilities. Near the far end of the chamber, a figure stood beside an immense structure that resembled both a beehive and a library. Its hexagonal cells pulsed gently, revealing glimpses of objects stowed within. A frayed letter seal with wax, the bronze key to a forgotten music box, a weathered river stone etched with a precise symbol. The figure, a man with sand-colored curls and a voice reminiscent of warm sand after summer rain, beckoned Elena closer. You've seen how feelings initiate ripples, but have you ever wondered how impressions locked within objects become reservoirs of prosperity? He began, sliding a velvet cloth aside to reveal a slim pen, its silver chased with faint engravings. Before Elena could reply, he handed her the pen. Instantly, a cascade of laughter, hope, and purpose shimmered up her arm. Objects absorb more than wear and tear, he continued, his tone almost conspiratorial. They're archives of emotional energy. Used thoughtfully, they confer abundance beyond their surface value. In that moment, a subtle scent of cinnamon and rainwater drifted to the hall as Elena recalled the comfort her mother's scarf once provided on anxious winter evenings. and a renewed vigor she felt when clasping her grandfather's compass during moments of uncertainty. These weren't mere souvenirs. They were conduits, unnoticed until now, for the transformation of emotional memory into applicable strength. Rather than trapping her in nostalgia, these objects actively informed her decisions, priming her mind to recognize unfamiliar manifestations of opportunity. Conversely, Elena noticed a young scholar nearby studying a tarnished coin. Her brow furrowed. She murmured to herself, almost as if reciting a spell, "Every mark and dent holds a lesson." The scholar explained, "I found this coin a morning after I lost my job. It was just a trifle at first, but holding on to it through months of challenge made it a talisman for resilience." In these words, Elena discerned a subtle truth. Prosperity isn't uniform. For each individual, its roots stem from intensely personal artifacts, invested with unique stories and the energy of lived experience. Furthermore, the structure of the hive-like archive displayed that objects themselves could amplify when shared or repurposed. Elena glimpsed a caretaker carefully passing a battered, handwritten recipe book to a newcomer, who blushed with delight upon recognizing one of the listed dishes. The sense of connection was instantaneous. The recipient pressed the book to his chest, a grateful tear running down his cheek, as if the inheritance of that small volume had endowed him with a new form of fortitude. In this exchange, prosperity expanded. The giver relinquished one kind of comfort, but gained the deep satisfaction of kindling hope and resourcefulness in another. The recipient, in turn, added his own thread of story and gratitude, making the artifact richer still. Now, consider how this dynamic plays out in the humble corners of your own life. What quiet totems rest in your drawer or on your desk, infused by years of silent contact and significance? How often do you pause to notice the subtle surge of assurance or insight they instill, not as relics, but as active partners in your nightly transformation of feeling into power? Perhaps the true alchemy lies in understanding that even neglected objects may contain dormant energies awaiting acknowledgement. By honoring their silent history, you open fresh avenues for emotional wealth to circulate and multiply. As the chamber thrummed with a deepening resonance, Elena felt a newfound clarity settle within her. Each artifact in the honeycomb, no matter how humble, represented a facet of prosperity sharpened and colored by touch, memory, and shared experience. The arc of abundance, she realized, curved not only through individual hearts, but through every ordinary thing imbued with care and story. Reflecting on this journey so far, you may sense how each layer of experience, every fleeting emotion and subtle transformation, has begun to entwine into something broader, like tributaries merging beneath the forest floor, widening unseen before surfacing as a mighty, unified current. The passage through the luminous laboratory, full of its shifting chambers and secret alcoves, has carried Elena and, by proxy, you across a living landscape where nothing remains inert for long. Even when stillness prevailed, it only served as a pause, a momentary intake of breath, preparing for the next wave of possibility. And all the while, beneath apparent separation, there is pulsed a quiet intelligence, gathering disparate echoes into a growing resonance, inviting you closer to a threshold where meaning and wonder stand ready to emerge as something new. Through Elena's variegated path, silence has not signified emptiness but anticipation, as if the very architecture of the place is attuned to the nearly imperceptible tremors of change. In hallways perfumed with memory, within gardens of chaos artfully cultivated, beneath domes where invisible maps chart restless desires, at every turn, transformation has worn 1,000 disguises. Sometimes it arrived disguised as fatigue, sometimes as curiosity, longing, or the pulse of shared momentum. You, listening now, may feel these subtle transitions accumulating, shaping the emotional terrain on which tomorrow's actions will unfold. Much like the surface of a mirror that, when tilted just so, reveals dimensions hidden during everyday movements, your own awareness has perhaps caught new glimpses of potential that once flickered only at the periphery. The ripples left by each moment, each inward glance or outward offering, do not vanish but combine, cross-pollinating across boundaries both internal and external. In this unfolding, nothing is lost. Instead, impressions fuse, impressions ferment, giving rise to unexpected textures and shades as intricate and unpredictable as the weaving in a hand-loomed tapestry. The space between sorrow and elation proves far narrower than it once seemed. In that twilight zone, both inspiration and resourcefulness bloom, nourished by nightly surrender to the unknown. As Elena's encounter with the laboratory deepens, so too does the atmosphere itself. The air grows richer, dense with the promise of something as yet unspoken, a clarity that cannot be rushed, a recognition seeded gradually by every small act of attention. Each step, each glance cast backward or forward, establishes a bridge that joins the known with the mysterious, the lived past of the possibilities waiting just beyond conscious reach. There is no sense of finality yet, only the building tension of an unsolved chord, an implicit assurance that the story has not simply displayed marvels for their own sake, but incrementally prepared the ground for fruit to appear in due time. Now, as the narrative approaches a pivotal juncture, you may notice a sense of convergence kindling inside you, echoes reverberating in deeper chambers of thought, questions at once idle now gathering urgency and shape. The passing of time within this nocturnal realm seems both expansive and compressed, a slow motion unfolding where meaning slips quietly between the lines and gestures. Are you beginning to sense the shadow of your own silent processes, the nocturnal workings of your imagination and emotional depths, coming to life at the edges of waking perception? In this growing hush, listen closely. Elena's discoveries, her wordless exchanges with caretakers and navigators, artisans and keepers, have kindled an expectancy not for an answer, but for an unveiling. It is as if a laboratory itself holds its breath, waiting for the perfect moment when disparate embers rise and coalesce into a flame, one capable of illuminating both the cost and the bounty hidden in the folds of ordinary emotion. Here, where all that flickers within is given sanctuary and purpose, anticipation grows. You are standing on the threshold not simply of understanding, but of encounter. The air trembles with readiness for the synthesis only you, rested, receptive, and quietly changed, can achieve as the story carries you, gently but inexorably, toward its most luminous revelation. A hush lingered as Elena, standing beneath the last vaulted arch of the laboratory, became conscious of a gentle change in the atmosphere. It was as though everything, the clinking of hidden machinery, the distant laughter echoing from unseen alcoves, the shimmering resonance of quiet contemplation, was coming to rest, weaving itself into a delicate tapestry where every thread, no matter its origin, pulled together. She felt neither exhaustion nor the frantic pulse of longing, but serene fullness, a sense of having come home to a place she had always carried within her, yet never truly named. With a breath that was almost a sigh, she realized what had been unfolding, intricately and patiently, through every corridor and encounter. The laboratory, both vast and intimate, was not just a fantastical retreat of the sleeping mind. It was an unveiling of possibility, an invitation to see emotional energy not as something to be tamed or resisted, but as the very raw material from which new realities, opportunities, and forms of abundance emerge. Fatigue, longing, even the quiet ache of regret. These were not weights trying to pull her under, but powerful currents capable of turning inward darkness into gold if only she allowed herself to listen, to witness, and to trust in the patient alchemy of her own becoming. Elena's eyes traveled over the final threshold and into a hush steeped in early dawn light, the first suggestion of day slipping across the patterned tiles. She smiled, not out of triumph, but in recognition. Whatever riches the world outside would quantify, none could rival the wealth she felt blooming in the silent acceptance of her human contradictions. She remembered the artisans, quietly transmuting sorrow into inventions, the gardeners, coaxing possibility from the tangled roots of doubt, the keepers of objects, passing courage and memory from hand to hand. She thought of the observatory's meditative silence, the mirror's magnification of ripples, and the hive's honey preservation of meaning. Every space she had entered, she now recognized, existed not to erase her complexity, but to harmonize it, to orchestrate the multitudes within her into something luminous and whole. As she stepped into the gentle light of morning, Elena felt an odd certainty. Each night, the boundaries between sleep and waking were less a barrier and more a passageway. She had learned, perhaps for the first time, that what is felt most deeply, however inconvenient or uncomfortable, is always the richest seed of possibility. That prosperity is not bestowed upon those who arrive unblemished or unburdened, but rather finds a home in those who dare to meet themselves as they are, to endure the night's restlessness with curiosity instead of resistance. It is in surrendering, not escaping, that transformation occurs. In yielding to the strange, nightly inner laboratory, one uncovers a quiet strength to shape a more abundant dawn. Outside, the city was stirring. Elena's steps, lighter than when she began, carried her into streets that seemed reimagined, brimming with undiscovered threads and hidden gold. And as you settle back, letting the final echoes of this bedtime story dissolve into your own darkness, perhaps you, too, will sense that the tides of feeling, no matter how subtle or powerful, belong to you. They are not simply to be survived, but to be cherished, refined, and allowed to guide. Every emotion, every fatigue, every flicker of hope or ache of regret is a note in the melody of your becoming, waiting to be transmuted in the quiet laboratory of your sleep. And so you carry the possibility of transformation within you, always, night after night, dream after dream, quietly forging your prosperity, one breath at a time.